Welcome everybody to Tasty Tuesdays. I'm Lorraine Hughes, your host from Crafting Possibilities, and this is an Embed with Possibilities podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. Brionie Jurd, how are you?
Hi, I'm going well. Thanks, Lorraine. Thanks for having me on.
I'm so honoured to have you here talking about a very tender topic tonight of pregnancy loss. So this has been a beautiful little series that we have brought forward so that we can talk about pregnancy loss in a more open, uplifting and forward movement kind of a way. I have had my own unique experience with pregnancy loss, and I know how alone I felt at the time. And also, I did not wish to join in any sort of counseling groups or anything like that, because I just felt like everybody was just going to be sitting there grumbling and complaining about the experience that they'd been through and never actually moving forward. And that was not something that I really wished to indulge in. It's like, I wish to move forward. I wish to process. I wish to not necessarily forget about it, but honor it in a really kind, beautiful way. And so for me, many years later, I'm now bringing these stories through to our beautiful audience so that they too can have that same moment of going, oh gosh, I wasn't alone for thinking that thought or this thought or that experience or having this experience. So thank you, Brionie, for being here with us today and sharing your stories so that you can add to the mix of how this particular pathway has happened for you.
Yeah. It's a pleasure.
So I will save your big introduction for perhaps another episode when you come back to do that particular type of episode. But so I'll just jump straight in now to our pregnancy loss journey with you. So would you be comfortable, please, sharing what led up to do let me get my words in the right way about the lead up to becoming pregnant, because that can be sometimes quite indicative of how a pregnancy goes, whether it's a stressful situation, whether it's not stressful, all those sorts of things. So would you be able to just expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. So leading up to getting pregnant, like my husband and I, like we knew we wanted to have kids. And I at that time, I was not in a super healthy state. Like I had chronic fatigue. I had a lot of health issues going on. I was, mentally like just living with quite a lot of anxiety and stress and struggling with my emotional health, I would say. So that came into play a bit. Like for me, struggling with chronic fatigue, I think I was concerned about how well my body would go carrying a baby and even having the energy for it. And as well as that, I'd had an experience of someone very, very close to me losing a baby at very close to full term. And so that made me super aware of what could go wrong. You know, this was my sister, and she had, everything going well in the pregnancy, and then right at the end had a very sudden placental abruption and thought she was going into labor. And this was at 38 and a half weeks. And so, that was a very close experience for me. This was before we, started trying for kids. And like that just left such an impression on me. And I think it really showed me the fragility of life and how things can go wrong so quickly. And I mean, I held him and that's a very strong memory still in my mind now. And that was, how long ago was that now? 13 or so years ago. And it was just, I just remember holding this baby and almost trying to will him to life and feeling like he looked strong, he looked healthy, he looked like had chubby cheeks, and like he could have just come to life. And to know that he was so close and then was lost, and this life was lost, really showed me just where things can go wrong and so unexpectedly. So I think that put a lot of fear in my mind, as well as my health issues and having that play a part as well. I think I was really, really scared. I knew I wanted to have a baby, and my husband and I definitely wanted to have a family, but there was a lot of fear involved because I think I was so aware. It just made me hyper aware of what could actually go wrong. And so for me, pregnancy was quite an anxious thing, I would say. And we got pregnant, and it didn't take us all that long. And, everything was going okay, but I do just remember being kind of hyper vigilant with our first.
Mm-hmm.
And, just super aware of every scan, wanting to know that everything was going to be okay, and just, wanting to get the best care and look after myself the best. And pregnancy for me also really took its toll on my body. I didn't like it at all. It was 9 months of morning sickness 24/7.
Goodness.
It wasn't fun for me. That was my first. And see, we've got 2 healthy boys, and then we lost a little girl during pregnancy in between my 2 boys. Yeah. So I'm sure we'll get to that, but I just wanted to and tell you what my situation is now. But that was my start to have pregnancy. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I can imagine that would have been incredibly raw for you to be there with your sister when she gave birth, and and going through that process with her, seeing her pain, and being the beautifully aware person that you are, would have really sunk deep into your heart as well. And it's just like, I don't wish to experience that for myself, so what can I do to prevent that?
Right. So that all the fear will come in to try and keep me safe from experiencing that pain. And exactly.
Absolutely. So with your little girl, so you've had one beautiful little bundle of joy, your boy is thriving. So what happened with the girl?
Yeah, so we wanted Aiden, who's he's just turned 12, and we wanted him to be able to have a sibling. And we got pregnant fairly easily again, and then everything was going really well. Everything was fine until but again, I was hyper aware. I just think it just opened up the door, and seeing my sister go through that opened up my eyes to talking to more people and just learning more about what could go wrong. So that was still very much present, but it got off to a really awesome start. All signs were, everything was great. And the initial scans were all positive, and then we came to a scan at almost 14 weeks. We were not very far into the scan when the lady doing the scan, and this is a moment that I will never forget, she just put her hand on my arm and said, "I've got some bad news." I just completely went into shock. And I think he was not even 2 at the time. He was with us as well. And it was completely unexpected, because all the signs were so similar to my first pregnancy, which had a good outcome. So even though I was aware of what could go wrong, I did not expect it. And just the way she said it so quickly, I knew something was very wrong. And so it was, I think I just really went into shock. And they told us that basically she had a very, very rare thing that can happen. It's 1 in 10,000 chance or something, where the skull is not formed properly, and there's just no chance of surviving that. And so we were told that. And the suggestions were, she said, this baby is not going to survive. It's very unlikely. We didn't know the gender at that time, actually, but we found that out later. So very, very unlikely of even surviving the pregnancy. and if the baby was to survive pregnancy, and be birthed, then it may only last, hours or not long at all. So then we were faced with that, and we went and got all sorts of advice. I had a private obstetrician who's really well regarded in Adelaide, because I went for that. I wanted that level of care because I think I just wanted to know I'd done everything I could to give us the best chance of having another healthy baby. And we asked a whole lot of people, and all advice was, we think you should end this, because there's zero chance of having a surviving baby. And for you to go through this pregnancy knowing that will be very detrimental to me and my husband, and knowing that. And so the strong advice was to do that, and to not put myself through, the living with the not knowing when or what was going to happen. And so that all happened in like 24 to 48 hours, all those discussions, really fast. And that was a tough time. That was a really tough time. And we were kind of in disbelief, but we were just getting all the advice we could. We kind of went into that mode, get all the information. And I think I just had this knowing, although it was super uncomfortable, that we needed to go through with this advice we'd been given from people who knew this. Because I think I knew subconsciously that if we were to continue knowing that we were going to not have a surviving baby, that could actually possibly mentally destroy my chances of then being able to go on and go through another pregnancy. And I think that's spot on in reflection, although it's still not nice to say that out loud, to be honest, that's what we chose to do. Like, it's still, and this was over 9 years ago now.
Yeah.
So that's what we had to do. And that was like going through that process of then losing that baby, and because my body's actually giving birth essentially was actually probably one of the toughest things. So much tougher than actually giving birth to my two healthy boys. So much.
So if it's okay, I'd like to just dive in a little bit into... We're here now. So in my pregnancy story, I was both 14 and a half weeks, both times when I had to end the pregnancies. So I get it. Like, even at that 11 and a half week scan, when they've gone and done the CVS test and stuff, you got to see everything on the big screen. You could see their little head and their arms and their legs, and you're like, oh wow, look at them, there's a little heartbeat and everything. It really is a formed being at even 11 and a half. And you know that they've had several more weeks to grow and develop. And so when I speak of this, I don't generally say abortion. To me, that was, at the time, I found that word really hard to say. I would prefer to say termination if I had to say anything, or we lost the baby. It was like, because abortion was just, it carries so much stuff with it. So many people's points of views and like just judgment, so much judgment without knowing why. How did you find the people, like, when you went through the process? Were you in hospital? Were you like, how did you have to go through things?
We were in hospital. Yeah. So I was essentially induced in a way at birth to end it. So it was, it's a horrible process to go through. Like, and I don't mean just emotionally. I mean, emotionally is the toughest, but physically on your body as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I ended up going into surgery to have mine done.
Oh, did you? Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So we had different experience there.
That's what I was sort
Yeah.
of asking. It's like, what was your procedure as such?
So they actually got me to
Mm-hmm.
take something orally that would then cause the baby to be basically delivered and end the life. Like it would force the baby out of my body, essentially. So it was quite kind of, I don't know, I want to use the word violent, but I really like lost control of my body in that process. And that was super scary. It was actually scary. It was for me, it was much scarier than giving birth because I just felt like I lost control of my body. And to actually have to be the one to put that tablet in my mouth was a really, it's not a nice thing to have to do.
No, not
But
at all.
and I've had to live with that, and being able to share with people I trust has helped to just openly share. But I also know it was what we had to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
For my own mental health, and even my husband and then our little son who we still had to care for. Like if we'd continued on with that, knowing who knows how many more weeks or months it would have gone on, to know it was going to end in death, to me was not kind to myself to do that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I totally comprehend what you're saying. Yeah, for sure. How did you mentally prepare for, having to go through the process?
Do you know, I didn't even have time to, because they just got on with it so fast that I think I was in this whirlwind of still shock but also knowing and just going, okay, I just almost was just like trusting all these people to be in the hands of these people who knew, who I trusted, that we were doing the right thing, and people who've seen women go through this. I asked a lot of people in the medical field who I know and deeply trust, and it all happened so fast. And they were like, we're just going to we don't want you to have to stew on this any longer, and let's just get on with it. So it was like when the decision was made, it was 6 o'clock the next morning, we were in hospital and having it done. So we didn't have, a long time to go into that deep processing. I think we just knew that's what we needed to do. And my husband was by my side and we were in it together. So, it's tough. And what you were saying before, I wanted to speak to as well about just bonding with the baby. Like sometimes I've talked to people about it. I'm like, well, it was really early on. It was only 14 weeks. But for anyone who's been pregnant, for any women out there, you bond with that baby as soon as you know. I mean, we're meant to, right? We're meant to, and you can't help it. Like it's natural. And so it doesn't sound like long, but it's enough time for you to think into the future and have hopes and for what that life is going to be like in your family. And you're also, dealing with the loss of everything you thought it could be, that life. And the bond that, and even in that short time, it's a very strong bond, of course. Seeing them on the scan, I'd already seen her a few times on the scan, looking fine as far as I could tell.
I totally get it. Like my first pregnancy, I was so excited, even though I knew that we had to do all this extra testing and stuff because of the genetic stuff coming through from my partner. And even with that, and even when we started getting some slight hints that things might not quite be right, like the first baby was undersized for the age, and like we had to do the 6-week scan, and then after that it was like the 11-week scan when we had the CVS test. And like I was really onto it. I was onto it with all my supplements. I was onto it with my health. Like I was being so careful, trying to make sure everything, at least from my side, was like tip top shape. And obviously things just didn't work out right. But the process that I went through when I ended up when we had to make that choice the first time round, we got the results from the genetic counsellor and came through on like I think a Monday or a Tuesday, but we didn't get to go into the surgery side of things until Friday of that week. And because they only do it on Tuesdays and Fridays, I think, up at the Women's and Children's. And the staff at the reception desk were really kind. They were very gentle. They were very, they could see that we weren't just, our circumstances were different to many of the, girls that they see come through. And then, we got up to the ward and we had to go, I like you, had to take the tablets and stuff, but they also gave me pethidine because I was going to be going into surgery. And of course, pethidine makes you feel all fluffy. So it was about the only thing that was like good about the whole day was the pethidine made me go all fluffy.
Wow.
So I wasn't feeling the pain as much, but I definitely was feeling a lot of it before they gave it to me, and it was not pleasant at all. But even worse than that was just some of the nursing staff were a little bit rough and abrupt, and the first time round, and just made me feel so wrong for what I was having to do. And it was like, it was not a nice experience at all, and as far as all of that goes. But going into surgery and stuff, it was just sort of like, oh yeah, here we go, here's another one. That was the vibe. And so it was a bit of a rough experience, but coming back out on the other side was nicer. Like the nurse that was in recovery, she was really, really lovely. And going back to the ward was okay. But I was left alone a lot with my partner and stuff. And then there was one point where I was just like, I really, really have to go to the toilet, like now. And so my partner helped me to the loo, and then it was just like, and there was this big, huge dumping of blood and fecal matter and everything, because they'd given me an enema while I was under. It's just something fun to do. So, and my partner was like, are you okay in there? I'm like, yeah, I think so. But it was just to not know what could happen, and just to be feeling just so alone, like not supported as such, was really scary. Really, really scary.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, that's not a nice experience. I was at Women's and Children's as well, but I must admit I felt very well cared for. So had nurses with quite a different attitude.
Must have been just a really bad run that time, because the second time round was a lot better. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. God, that's tough with what you're already going through to then have that kind of treatment. That's tough. That's tough. Yeah, we had actually a really beautiful counsellor who came in afterwards and just sat with us and spent time with us and supported us, and that really helped. And we had a little bit of time with the baby, just holding this tiny, tiny, tiny little baby. Yeah. So we had a little bit of special moments with that, with her, and and then they actually went and did an autopsy, and that's when we found out the gender, because we wanted to, and just just got a confirmation of what they already really knew, and then they cremated her and gave us the ashes. We've got We still have them in the house, actually in the boys' bedroom. They're little ashes in an urn. So,
Yeah. There is a part of me that does wish I had asked for that. They did offer that to me, if I would like to have the, remains cremated and that. But I just, at the time, just said no, just
yeah.
it's enough. It's enough to deal with
Yeah.
what I'm dealing with,
Yeah.
So yeah, that is certainly one of the harder parts of that journey was just to feel like I had nothing to show for it. Like I remember, for the second one, that morning I stood in the shower and I just said for her spirit to go. I said, please just leave. Like I know what's coming up, and because with it being a genetic test, we could I was able to know what the sex was and everything as well. And energetically, I knew, or my awareness said it was actually the same spirit tried to come to me 3 times. Cheeky little munchkin that she is. But yeah, I just said to her on the 3rd time, please, I don't wish for you to have any of this trauma staying with you. Like I'm pretty aware of what they do in that surgery, and I don't want you to go through that. I don't want you to feel that. So please leave, please go. And but I do recall like bending over to put my shoes on, and I could feel that lump in my belly, and it was like the size of a tennis ball lump, and it was kind of like uncomfortable to put my shoes on and stuff like that. And I was like, at that point of my pregnancy where I was actually really feeling stuff, and it's like to know that was all going to go and just disappear, and that messed with my mind for a while.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a tough one. And when it's so sudden like that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that, maybe, I don't know, people don't think of or doesn't get talked about anyway in my world is just even a body having to recover from going through something like that too. Like because of what I went through, kind of like a birthing process, although it was forced, but then my body actually, I think in some ways thought it had actually given birth. And so I was producing milk and there was all sorts of wacky hormonal stuff going on, which was hard to have all this going on as like this reminder that I was pregnant and now suddenly I'm not, but my body's just kind of thinking that something has happened, and so it's responding and producing. But it was crazy. And that adding into the mix of the emotions and the grieving process and the shock, and then adding into the mix the whole physical and hormonal stuff that my body was going through from being pregnant and then suddenly not, that really added to it, and it was strange.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely am grateful that I found access bars in between the 2 pregnancies. So the pregnancies are actually what set me on the path of energetic healing in a really super active way. So it's like the first termination, I bled for 6 weeks, very, very heavy. It was very painful. I was munching on so many Nurophens, it wasn't funny, just to get me through. And I mean, I was used to having quite severe period pain, but this is like the worst period pain I'd ever had in my whole entire life. And the second time round, I actually had my bars. So I had the termination done on the Friday. I had my bars run on the Monday. And that termination, bearing in mind it was 14 and a half weeks both times that they got stopped, that one was dropped down to 4 weeks of bleeding and almost no pain. I didn't even have to take any pain medication.
Wow. Amazing contrast.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Huge.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about the grief process, and I would love to know, like, how did grief show up for you? But just before I mentioned that, I'd like to just remind our viewers of the 7 stages of grief. Now, some have actually extended out to 9. The original was only 5, but I think 7 is about right. And of course, we can float between the different levels and layers of grief. So they talk about it as being shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance and hope, and processing. So how did you go through the process of grief? How are you at with that now? Where are you sort of float with it? You know, it's been a little bit of time between that and now, but where are you at?
That's a big open question, and I probably have a lot to say on that one. It's really interesting. Yeah, I definitely, when you said the questioning phase, I do remember that very much afterwards, from both my husband and I trying to grasp onto reason and understanding and want to know what happened, and going over and over things like our mind wants to do, right? Find answers. And also the self-judgment that came into that for us both individually, you know, taking, feeling like we'd done something wrong, or when even like everyone was saying to us, this is an absolute freak thing that happened, and you know, it was nothing we did. It's still very hard to stop your mind from going there, and the whole what ifs. You know, I guess that then buys into a bit of the denial, right? Trying to understand how we could have prevented it, I guess. Just questioning things. What could we have done? What have I done? What if? And my husband, you know, carried a lot of that himself too, feeling like it was something in him, me feeling like it was something in me. Did my body let us down? So we definitely went through that phase for some time, I think, just to search for answers. But, you know, I think we also talked to a lot of people and really did come to terms fairly quickly. In not too long anyway, to come to terms with acceptance that it really was just a thing that happened. And then I would say, yeah, I think, look, just the grieving process, there was just, I just remember a lot of deep grieving, and my husband and I just being in that together is what my memory goes to. I think we supported each other beautifully. My family supported me beautifully. And I had, you know, some friends I was close to as well, and I'm so grateful for that. And I think sometimes these kind of things that happen in a relationship can either bring you closer or it can tear people apart, this kind of thing. And it's all about how we manage our grief. And my husband and I, fortunately, have a really, really solid relationship where we're very open about everything. And I think that really helped us to process. So I felt very safe with him to grieve, and we would just talk. We would openly talk a lot. And, you know, our little son was there too. So we would talk to him because he was there when we had the scan. He knew something was wrong, and he was little, but he's very in tune. And so just openly talking about it, that helped us. Just being open and telling people about it definitely helped us to process. And just, I think the way it's definitely brought Rob and I, my husband and I, closer, I think, from going through that. It gave us a whole new level of appreciation and gratitude for the people we do have in our lives, and our elder son, Aiden, at the time. And I think that's, you know, I think sometimes loss and grieving can sometimes make us armor up more and want to block ourselves off from connecting with people or from experiencing that pain again. Or I think if we really allow the grieving process to happen and open up with it, I think it can also then deepen the gratitude that we have for life and for what we do have, knowing it's so precious and we don't want to take it for granted. And we certainly went that way with it. So, I look back on that little life and I see so many gifts that she gave us in that, bringing us closer together as a family. Really, it really makes you assess your values and really makes you think deeply about what is actually important, and to check in on yourself and check where your priorities are in life. It did that for us. It shook us up big time. So there's gifts in that. Yeah. And then I think, but then if I sort of jump forward, and I would love to talk about then the experience of then having another pregnancy after that. But just talking about the grieving process, I think, sometimes the emotion still hits me when I'm talking about it with people, and I've had support from people in processing it through NLP and hypnotherapy and beautiful friends, and just when I have those waves come through, and she's still very much in my thoughts. But I definitely think I've made so much peace with it, because I think what's helped me is the gratitude that it brought, and the gifts, and just being so grateful for the people that are in my life. So yeah, I think that's sort of where I'm at with it.
Beautiful, beautiful. I just love that moment of going, I can see the gifts here. It's very much unfortunately, my husband and I ended up, especially after the second one, we hadn't fully processed our grief. We both armored up in a lot of ways, and there was a lot of extenuating circumstances with the family, and none of my family's here in Adelaide, and my friendship circle was kind of small. And in fact, after the first one and the week after that, I lost a friend who I'd been spending a lot of time with, because she felt like, in her belief system, that what I had done was, she could understand why I had done it the first time, but she couldn't understand why I would try again if that was going to be the possible outcome. Yeah. And I remember sitting there, and basically not even 7 days after the procedure, and just going, I can't even fathom why you would be saying this to me right now. I was still in a lot of shock, and I was angry, and I was sad, and I was really rolling with everything. And because all of that was so intense, and also I'm so aware of my husband and where he was at, and his pain and his grief and his guilt, and because the stuff has come through from his side of things, the genetic stuff. So he was dealing with a lot of guilt. And I, at that stage, didn't really know how to be sovereign within myself as well. So I was constantly trying to help heal other people without knowing what I was doing, really. And so I was trying to downplay my grief, because we had his parents living right next door, and so they were in grief as well on our behalf. And there was just so much going on over the two properties, and I just went internal and just stiff up a lip, and let's just keep going.
So you agree, and you were grieving loss of more than just a baby then too, like your friend as well.
Yeah. It was a really tough one, that first one. And the second time, and of course we'd begun to tell people and stuff, because it was later on through the process, and we were like, yay, we're pregnant, yay. Just to a few people. Then you had to go through the process of saying, oh, well, actually, no, it didn't work out. So then we were having to process their grief as well as on top of ours, because then they're all sad for us, and it's just like, oh.
Yeah, and it's interesting how, I could look, this bringing up some memories for me, hearing you talk about that too, of just some people in our lives being very uncomfortable with what we've been through and the emotional aspect, and not knowing what to say, and so maybe saying nothing, and them being uncomfortable with what we went through. And so that brought up a lot for me too, so I definitely had a few people in my life who I felt super supported by, and others where I just felt no support or understanding. And I know now, with more awareness that I have now, that's just simply a discomfort in them. But not knowing it at the time, I now remember that real aloneness at times, of feeling like people just don't get it. And here I am grieving and having outpours of emotions sometimes at special occasions, and feeling that loss, and people around me just saying nothing and no comfort, no words, no nothing. And I just remember feeling this real like aloneness, and people don't get what I'm going through. And it's just, people don't know what to say often at those times. And I remember my sister went through the same thing. People just, would say nothing, even though they knew something had happened, because they were just uncomfortable and not knowing what to say, I guess.
Absolutely. I was working in childcare throughout both of them as well. So seeing, all these beautiful mums coming in and with their babies or pregnant or whatever, and it was just like, let's take some big deep breaths and just, I think I've got something to do over here. Those moments where it was just like boof in your face, and it's just like, And I remember in between the pregnancies, especially, where I found it really difficult to go into like the baby sections of like Big W or anything like that. It was just, I just can't, or if I saw somebody, with their baby, and they were quite clearly not necessarily being particularly good parents to that baby, and the baby was either freezing cold or struggling or whatever, and it was like something that the parents could fix, and they weren't. It was like, and I the anger inside me of going, you just, like, especially when I saw teenage mums and things, it was like, you don't realize just how precious that is. There's people like me who would love nothing more than to have a beautiful little bundle in their arms, and I didn't get to do that, and it took a while to move past that.
I can imagine, and I can relate to. I just remember going through times of finding it very hard seeing people who would just sail through a pregnancy and just maybe not even really look after themselves that well, and then have this healthy baby at the end of it and be completely, in my mind, this is the story I made up in my head, unaware of, things that could go wrong, and how things, just seeing it happen so easily for other people. I remember my head wrestling with that for some time.
Yeah, I totally get it. It's like I come from, on both sides of my family, long line of very prolific procreators. So it's like the second time round, it took us a while to get pregnant, and I was just like, why is this taking so long? I don't understand, and I put so much pressure on myself to get pregnant again because, the clock is ticking. I was like 30, coming up to 36, and, all the doctors and stuff were going, you're getting into the dangerous zone, and it's like, oh God.
And then that doesn't help with getting pregnant, does it, when you add stress and pressure?
No. So yeah, it was a very interesting time, and unfortunately, for my husband and I, it did end up pushing us apart, and because we just weren't handling our grief at all, and it got to a point where I was just like, and it sounds weird to say it, but it is the truth. We actually loved each other so much that it was healthier for us to split apart and do our own healing on our own than it was to stay together, because each of us were both in basically suicidal thought space of wanting to set the other one free. So it wasn't about trying to take away our own pain. It was both of us were having these thoughts, but individually, and wanting to have it so that the other person could continue on in their life without having the complication of you being there. And it was a really interesting moment to know how that level of love and suicide goes together. And it was just like how, like, so many people would just go, I don't understand that, because, they look at suicide as being an incredibly selfish act. And that's their point of view about suicide. And I just sit there and you go, you can't know that it's a selfish act when you don't know what's going on inside of their mind, and you don't know where their heart is. And, it's might be the only way that they feel that they can move out of that space. Like, they don't feel they'd have any other options, and I've been down that road a couple of times, and both times I've gone, I'm never going to allow myself that space again. And so the second time, I was just like, no, we're not doing this, no way. And so the only option we had was to separate. And, now there was a couple of years we didn't talk. We got divorced, and then we sort of moved on, did our own things for a while. And a couple of years ago, we reconnected, and as friends, because we always were just really great buddies, and we made a good team back in the day. But we're both in very different places now. Like, there's no way we could be a couple again, but we're good friends. Like, so I feel very fortunate to have him still in my life in a way. And, and we can sit there and reflect on our journey and our healing together now. We've had some very long talks about all of it. And, it's something that's sort of a bit ass about face in a way. But we're there.
That's good. Well, at least you're doing it now.
Oh, absolutely. So you did mention, your beautiful husband, Rob. And I was just curious to know, like, you said that you and he had lots of long talks about everything. And I sort of don't really wish to put you on the spot of asking to sort of dive into how his head was going. But how do you feel that he was coping with all of the whole process? Like, it would have been a huge shock for him too. Because we don't often talk about the guys and how they cope with this sort of stuff.
Yeah. And, I think he probably, that's true. I'm really glad you brought that up, actually, because I think he probably went into a mode of feeling like he had needed to carry a lot to support me through, like, the process we went through physically and emotionally, and still caring for our little boy. I think he interesting. I think I took on a lot of responsibility for what happened, thinking it was my body and like things like, but knowing on reflection and talking about it since, and all the discussions we've had, I think he also took on a lot of responsibility for even, for why it even happened, thinking he played a role and his body let down. So it's interesting how we both did do a lot of that, taking it on, and a lot of self-judgment. And yeah, I think we can tend to forget what the guys went through, but it's hard for him. He's not physically going through the whole experience, but he's there emotionally. And the same fears and similar anxieties we both carried, and around the whole thing. Yeah.
And
like there's still, it came up quite recently. We were talking about it in we went to a beautiful retreat in Tasmania just last month, and talking with a group and sharing a lot of our story. And it was interesting when Rob shared, and we were talking about, sort of milestones that happen in our lives, pivotal moments, things. And he spoke a lot about this. All these years later came up for him. And there was a lot of emotion that just lifted, I guess, at another layer for him. And he talked openly with the group about the self-judgment he carried, and worrying for a long time that it was his body and something he'd done or hadn't looked after himself, all the things that go around in your head. And and how he carried a lot of emotion. I do think we often we don't focus on that. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
I remember really distinctly, especially when I was in the second CVS test, and the surgeon that was doing that one, he was really rough, and I was in a lot of really major discomfort while he was, getting the sample from the placenta. And I remember my partner, he was my husband by the stage, and he was just sort of looking at this guy, and he's like, because he knows my threshold for pain is quite high, and he's like holding my hand, and he can see I'm trying really hard just to not be crying or anything. And he's just going, if this guy pushes it once more, I'm going to fucking clock him. And I'm just like, whoa, just to have that level of protection was something that I didn't quite know that he would be like. It felt quite, I felt really honored by him in that process. And I was, in the back of my mind, I went, wow, if he's going to be like this with me at this point, just imagine what an amazing dad he's going to be.
Yeah.
And like you said at the start, all of those hopes and dreams of things to come in the future, and they all just went gone. And that moment was, I still really, I had that in my head of going, this is why he's always going to be, the good guy in my world, because his level of care and love and protection is so big. His heart is so big for those he cares about.
That's beautiful. That's lovely. You felt so protected. I felt like that with Rob as well, just really protected and nurtured, and was just right by my side through the whole time, the whole thing. That definitely helped me so much.
Absolutely. And to have even afterwards when we got home, and anything I required, all I had to do was ask, and he was just like, boom, got it. It was right there with everything. Need a cup of tea? Sure. Need a blanket? Sure. You want pizza? Okay. No, he really was amazing in that regard. And I have to be honest, even though I was trying to push all my shit down and be space for him, I really don't know that I was space enough for him. And I feel for him in that regard of like, he took on so much emotionally from this process and so much guilt. And even though I tried so hard to say to him, look, you can't be feeling guilty. It's just, it is what it is. You know, if we could have had it any other way, we would have, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you did get to touch a little bit on the gifts, the spiritual gifts, like the gifts of having gone through this process, especially with you and your beautiful husband. And I was wondering, you know, is there sort of a little bit anything else that has grown or shifted, changed, or developed from this experience in your life?
Oh, that's a good question. It actually makes me think of your son a little bit when you talk about that, because we then went through another pregnancy, and feeling the response I feel to your question, but feels relevant. So my second, that was a really hard pregnancy. We had actually personally experienced that loss, then decided to try again. Because I'm sure you can relate to that, having gone through it again after having your loss. But yeah, like actually deciding to go through it again, I would say, courageous after experiencing that loss. Deciding to
Oh dear, we seem to have lost her. There she comes.
So
I don't know what happened.
No. It just suddenly went. It just conked out. I mean, it just went. It just locked. I don't know what happened. Crashed.
Oh dear. So funny. All right, so you were just updating. That's okay. That's okay. I'm like saying, calling out, are you on the internet? Just in case it was at my end. So the gifts that you were talking about, you know, especially with the third pregnancy. So can you just refresh us on that one again?
Yeah, I'll go back to that. So I was just starting to talk about, going through the next pregnancy and deciding to do that after experiencing the loss was quite scary. You know, we had to sit down, but like we knew we wanted to have another child. We knew we wanted Aiden to have a sibling. So like, we're going to try again. And it felt like a courageous decision, I must say, to decide to do that after what we just experienced. But I think we just knew, and we knew we could support each other, because I think Rob and I really supported each other beautifully in what we experienced. So I think we just felt like whatever happens, we'll get through it together. We felt very much as a team. And so and I got pregnant again quickly, straight away, which was great. But yeah, that pregnancy was super anxious. It was scary. And every scan was friggin' scary. Like panicking ahead of every scan. So like, yeah, experiencing a lot of fear because it was just, you know, it was in the scan that we got the bad news and the shock from the baby we lost. And so every scan was just so scary. I was hyper vigilant. I was being super, super careful, even more than before, about everything I'd put in my body and everything. I think we just wanted to know that we'd given it the best shot having another baby. And it's really interesting how our minds almost wanted everything to be absolutely perfect, and everything that seemed like the tiniest flaw, we would almost like feel exacerbated. Probably because we were just hyper alert for something going wrong. So any tiny little hint of it was just like, shit, what's going on? And was scary. So that pregnancy was long and hard, and I felt sick for 9 months again. So it's not fun. It wasn't fun. And yeah, it wasn't until and I think I was just hyper alert for any movement, and then when he wasn't moving, what's going on? And it was just an anxious time. And so, but then when we had him, it was really interesting. Like I just remember giving birth and just over and over and over asking everyone in the room, the doctors and everything, is he okay? Is he okay? Is he okay? Sure he's okay. And that's all I cared about. And I just remember being like, it was relief too. It was gratitude. It was love. It was so many emotions giving birth to our second son, but a ton of relief. And also then this is really interesting what happened too, is he came out and he had these little marks, like little birthmarks on his face and stuff. And it was interesting where our minds went, like we were just fixated on them a bit, like, oh no, he's blemished. And for a little while, our mind couldn't cope with that, like with any, which is interesting, right? Because you kind of think, well, and I think we probably judged ourselves for that, because my husband and I were both experiencing the same thing. And I think it was almost like our minds, because he wasn't perfect, although he's perfect, it was like our minds just latched onto that, and probably because something to do with what we had experienced of losing a baby, that we were hyper alert of everything being, you know, spot on perfect. So it was just interesting that we went there, but not for very long. And you don't even hardly notice them on him now. But it was just, I think it was like our minds wanted everything to be absolutely perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's where we went with it. But we were just, extremely grateful to have a healthy baby. And, you know, I see, coming back to the gifts and the spiritual gifts, I see our little girl in him, in Elliot. And, you know, I just sense that she's a part of him. And he's a really courageous, outgoing, like just very expressive soul. And I feel like he also represents the courage that it took for us to carry him and go through with another pregnancy. And that's what I see in, like, the gifts he represents. And I look at him and I'm like, you are the gifts that we get when we have the courage to face our fears and the courage to follow our heart and in what we want. And, you know, we could have just not tried for another baby out of fear of that happening again. But we chose to try. And to me, he's just this beautiful symbol of the gifts that we get when we have the courage to do things like that, even when we're scared. So
absolutely. I just love that. I love that for you guys. And, you know, it's just, it's like a soothing balm. Every time you look at it, we just healing that little bit more, It is
so healing. It is so healing. And I would say almost every day and nearly every night when I say goodnight to him, it's just this remembering in a positive way and deep, deep gratitude. Like, we are so blessed to have you in our family. Like, he is so loved. And he gives us so much love and so much joy. And we often talk about how life wouldn't be the same without him, because he just brings so much character and joy and laughter to our family. And so he's this absolutely precious gift in our family. And he reminds me of that, every day when I look at him and every night when I say goodnight to him. So, yeah.
So cool. And I love that you now get to assist others along with their healing process by, having your business of Be Set Free. And, I imagine that really helped as a catalyst to move into that area of healing and development and coaching and all that sort of stuff too.
Yeah, it did. It was definitely part of it. I think all my life experiences played a role in my journey it really started with my journey with chronic fatigue in my 20s, experiencing burnout and anxiety and bouts of like depression and going on this big soul search and holistic healing journey of mind, body, spirit, covering all the elements to get myself better, because I knew I wanted to get myself better naturally. And also in that whole journey, really uncovering my purpose of then helping others to heal and to live their best lives, and to also tap into their gifts and their purpose and connect more deeply with themselves. So it definitely played a role. It definitely played a role, being part of my sister going through that, and then me. And, I've always been big on wanting people to feel comfortable to share what they're going through, and wanting us all to connect at that level and be more open about what we're going through and support each other through that.
100%. It's like, if I hadn't gone through that experience, I really don't know that I would be where I am today. As horrible and painful and heartbreaking as it was, even I remember a year or so down the track, and I just remember being with a friend and just bursting into tears, like uncontrollable grief tears, for what had happened the second time round. And it's funny because the first time I don't really remember the date. I couldn't tell you. Second time round, I remember that date. No doubt about it. It's the 14th of December. So it's like, it's just one of those things that's burned in there. But the first one, no.
Okay.
And one of the one of the healing things that my husband and I did before I left was, it was actually in the process of me packing and stuff. And I was like, we need to go through a process of, I'd actually forgotten I'd done this with him, but we actually lit a fire in the backyard, and we went through and we burned all the stuff to do with the baby. We burned all the scans, all the medical stuff, like everything to do with the baby. So while we didn't have a cremation of the body, we did have like a cremation of sorts of the other parts to do with that baby. And the only things that was left over was a crochet blanket that his mum had made and a crochet blanket that I had made. And so he kept the one from his mum, and I've kept the one that I made. My blanket is now with my granddad's special stuff from when he passed, and he's apparently placed his blanket up with his grandparents. So up on their gravesite up in Wallaroo or Kadina. So yeah, so it's kind of like both ways the baby was being protected or looked after by the grandparents, and being that she is part of my spirit team now, because it was part of my healing journey too, of actually welcoming her into my spirit team. Her and my granddad get to, float around and have fun and enjoy each other. And I remember one part of my grieving process was being really angry at my granddad, because I told him before, like many years before he had died, you cannot die until I have a baby. You're not allowed to die until I have a baby. And he's like, of course not, And then he went and carked it on me. And I'm just like, so there's, part of that bargaining thing in my world was like, see, I can't have a baby because my granddad's not here. Sorry, I mean, I can laugh about it now, but at the time that was where I was floating between anger and denial and bargaining and, all around the fact that granddad wasn't here. How dare he leave me, And so that grief with granddad not being here and the grief of not having the babies, that all kind of got mushed up together as well.
Wow.
So
I certainly feel her spiritual presence in our family a lot. Yeah, I feel like, although her life was so incredibly brief, she had such an impact on all of us. Yeah, she's helped open us up more deeply to speaking about these things and wanting to help others open up to speak about them. Because when we open up and just speak it, even that's so healing, to openly share with others. And there's so many women that experience this. So often when I share with someone, they'll say back to me, yeah, I've experienced that too. So many. Yeah.
And I've loved doing this series too. I've absolutely really loved it, because every single one of you beautiful three brave women have all had different experiences. And for that, I am so, so grateful. So grateful for every single one of you being courageous enough to speak on a public platform about your experiences, and to just open it up that little bit further, so that, it's not so lonely. And it's just not, I mean, I'd hate for it to ever be normalized but it is a part of our normal life, unfortunately, that sometimes we have to go through these very, very heartbreaking moments. And I'd like to be able to normalize the talking about it, not necessarily normalizing the process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm with you. 100% with you. I would love for it to be more openly talked about as well, and normalized in that way. Yeah.
Well, you're doing the good work by getting out.
So lonely. I agree. There were definitely periods where it felt really lonely. In my thoughts and grieving process. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I remember I sort of touched on it a little bit before, and you sort of mentioned about when people don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same whether it be a pregnancy loss, a death, or whatever. One of the things that's the hardest for the family to cope with is when somebody says, when they're saying, I'm so sad for you. And it's like, I just think that there are better ways to show your support than adding another emotion on top. It's like saying something like, I'm here for you. To me, that is just way more comforting than saying, I'm so sad for you. Sorry for your loss. It's like, you can try again another time.
Oh, I know. Yeah. I I've found in helping others too and supporting my clients through various different types of grieving processes, it's such an individual thing too, and how people want to process and want to grieve. And I think, the best support you can be as a friend or family member is to just, like you said, just know that let them know that you're there, but not be projecting your own thoughts or judgments on how they should process their grief as well. And that's why I say to my clients, let yourself grieve how it feels right for you, how you want to. You do you in this process. It's your loss and that person you've lost, and do what's right to honor yourself and them and the loss.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Like that processing of grief. I find that to be super fascinating, but I find people super fascinating. So,
well, so do I. That's part of why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's like, me too.
People are complicated and so interesting.
Yeah. Alrighty, my love. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm very, very honored to have shared and experienced your journey with us about your pregnancy loss and the full process of how that rolled out for you. And it opens my heart so much to know that we can have these conversations on this kind of platform, and that it is, how lucky are we? How lucky are we to be able to do that? So super cool.
Beautiful thing. Thank you for creating the platform for us to do this.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, if anybody would like to have a private session with you to talk about perhaps their loss and have your assistance with helping them to move forward, and to have, as I spoke about with my guest last week, Nancy Lovato, post-traumatic growth.
Nice.
And go through that process with you, how can they best get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, I think you've got the link to my page there, my personal page, Brionie Jurd. Feel free to friend request me, or you can just directly send me a message. That's the best way. You can just send me a direct message through Messenger. I'd love to hear from you. I'm really happy to have a chat, even if you just want to ask me a few questions or find out a little bit more about what would be involved in having sessions with me. First step I always do is just we have a chat first, and so I can find out a little bit more about what you're after. You can ask me questions. We can see if it feels aligned to move forward, and just have a chat. And that's, I'm always open for that. So that would be the first step if you're feeling a pull towards finding out a bit more.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. Pleasure. It's beautiful for me to openly talk about it too. So I love this. Thank you.
This month has been a big heart-opening space for me too. And it's just been so nice to be able to feel where I'm at with my healing journey with it, because it's one of those things. Grief is something that she's a little bit of a sneaky mistress. She can just sometimes come out of nowhere and grab you.
Yeah. I hear you.
And then you'll be tootling along, then all of a sudden, bam. It's like, oh, okay. We're still there, okay. But they do say time heals wounds, and I do believe in that too. It does soften it.
I do too. Other thing I've learned is we can't rush the healing process too.
Nope.
And it's best just to let it run its course and have a lot of self-compassion in the process.
I can also say to that the people who have been through these sorts of things and have been going through that healing process and that journey are often the most kindest, compassionate people you can ever meet, because they get it.
Yeah, I agree.
They know the pain, they know the heartache, and they know the process. And there's a certain strength and softness with this type of person.
Absolutely. So, I know what you mean. And like having said, like we can't rush the healing process and we need to, see it through. It's also, I found asking for support helps enormously too. And I find every time we talk openly about something that we're carrying that can help and bring it out into the light, that is healing every time we do it. This is healing for me, even now talking to you about it. And I'm sure it's doing something for you as well. So I feel like, there's something about, and it can be the scariest thing to ask for support. And for me, for a long time, it was super scary. But I can tell that's also helped me with the grieving process, the healing process around this, around everything, is that, just actually asking for support.
Thank you for bringing that up, because it's one question I sort of touched on but didn't kind of go back to, was you mentioned that the NLP and stuff and the hypnotherapy really helped you. Was there any other modalities that you used to help in those initial stages?
The only other thing really was because I hadn't been introduced to NLP and hypnotherapy back then. And so I actually saw a counsellor throughout my pregnancy with our second boy after we had the loss, just to help me through. So that was this. I had that support through that pregnancy of a counsellor. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was something. And in hindsight, if I had been introduced to any of the other modalities that I blend in now, which I do a blend of some psychotherapy stuff and inner child work and that, and as well as NLP, hypnotherapy, a lot of other tools I've learned. If I knew all of those, I would have been pulling on all of those, and I'm sure it would have helped me a lot more through that pregnancy. But I just, they hadn't entered my world at that point. But it was part of that was the journey that led me towards studying it, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much more I would like to say about that, but it's time to go, my love.
A whole nother conversation maybe for another night.
Absolutely. So thank you again for being here. I'm incredibly grateful for you, and I wish you all the best in continuing on your beautiful journey of inspiring others to continue to heal for them as well, and knowing that they have somebody that they can reach out to who is kind and compassionate around these areas, because there's a hell of a lot of people that are very judgmental, and especially when it comes to pregnancy loss, and for all the various versions of pregnancy loss that there are out there. So thank you for being one of the compassionate ones.
Thanks for having me on. Such a pleasure.
Oh, you're so welcome. Alrighty, my friends. So we are going to be off for the night, and I'll be back, of course, for Find You Fridays for our intuitive reading and healing program, and that will be at 8 p.m. Adelaide time. And then next week on Tasty Tuesdays, we have Joyce Piper, who is the Face Yoga Coach. So I'm really looking forward to having a chat to her, a bit of change of pace from the pregnancy loss talk. But yeah, it's going to be fun having a chat to Joyce. She is just the most deliciously cute young she's going to love me saying that, young lady that I've ever worked with. And we were very fortunate to have met each other at a funeral, of all things. So she's just, and we were actually helping out a friend of ours who is a funeral celebrant, and we were the ushers, so we got to spend a good bit of time together getting to know each other. So turns out she's a face yoga coach, and we'll get to find out a lot more about what that means. So that's next week on Tasty Tuesdays. For now, please get out there, do something tasty for yourself. I don't really mind what it is. Do something just tasty, nourishing, and nurturing for you. And Until I see you next time, be bold, be brave, be you, my beautiful ones. Subscribe if you're on YouTube, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.